Canadian football is a magic show, a century-old spectacle, grown men battling to cross a line drawn in the dirt. It is a game filled with heroes, great players and great teams, bringing championship pride to their faithful fans. The field is a battleground where skill and determination are the tools of the trade. It is a game that has grabbed the nation by the heart. An annual struggle becomes an epic battle as teams fight for the ultimate glory, the chance to hold the Grey Cup and become forever known as a champion. Canadian football was born in the mid-1800s, a child of rugby reshaped by robust young men off on a new world adventure. The version they devised, rougher, tougher, bloodier, found a home on university athletic fields where the student body became the game's first fans. But this wonderful new game was strictly a Canadian phenomenon until a fateful weekend in 1874 when the men of McGill University accepted an invitation to play 2 matches at Harvard and found the Americans playing a different game entirely, an offshoot of soccer containing little of the rough and tumble chaos now so dear to the Canadians' hearts.
They played 1 game under the Canadian rules, under McGill's rules, 1 game under the Harvard rules. In the end, Harvard enjoyed the type of football that McGill brought so much that they wrote away to rugby school in England and they got the official rugby rules.
The game of the North was now a cross-border phenomenon. Soon, it spilled over the campuses and into the cities, then west with the settlers. No longer merely the sport of the educated elite, it became the game of the working masses. Teams sprang out of meetings held in rooms over grocery stores, in mechanics halls and rowing clubs. Bankers bashed ironworkers. Lawyers took their lumps from lumberjacks. Leagues were born, collapsed, and rose again. A new country had a new game and new heroes. By the turn of the century, football had been embraced by athletes of all ages and from all walks of life, competing for trophies of every shape and size. In 1909, word of this new game caught the attention of Albert Henry George Grey, the 4th Earl Grey and the Governor-General of Canada. Well-known patrons of Canadian arts, the Earl and his wife decided that the new game should have a true national championship. At a cost of $48, Lord Grey provided a simple silver trophy that would one day be the stuff of dreams, the Grey Cup.
The cup was donated by the Governor-General, Lord Earl Grey, who probably never saw a game played. He put up the trophy for the Amateur Football Championship of Canada, and people who were playing football in all parts of Canada saw it as emblematic of the national championship.
The first Grey Cup game was held on a chilly December Saturday in 1909. 3,800 fans made the trek to Rosedale Field to watch the University of Toronto defeat the Parkdale Canoe Club in what was rather grandly called the Canadian Championship. But Lord Grey's trophy wasn't there. Someone had forgotten to have it engraved. The games then were simple gatherings, young and not so young athletes out for a rough and tumble afternoon. But soon, Earl Grey's Cup was more than just another trophy. As the decades passed and the number of challengers grew, it would become the new game's holy grail. In the 1940s, not even a world in conflict could halt the yearly quest. When Canada went to war, enlisted men formed teams and battled for the Cup under military banners. Through rain, fog, mud, or the chill of Canadian winter, the Cup chase never faltered. Now, the pursuers wanted more than the championship. They wanted that magical, matchless moment when they could grasp Earl Grey's Cup and triumphantly hold it high.
When you win the Grey Cup, you know, you're on such a high because you've accomplished what 9 teams start out to do and only 1 does.
What it meant to the city of Winnipeg and the fans, that's when it starts sinking in of just how important the Grey Cup is and what it means to the people of Canada.
It really didn't hit you till a few days later, and you know, when you get back in Edmonton and you're going to the parade and say, hey, this is kind of a big deal.
The city of Vancouver, on our return, just opened their arms to us. A marvelous thing and very special. There was love here for the BC Lions.
20 below weather, the streets were lined all the way from the airport entrance to City Hall, where they took us back to on buses, and the town just went nuts.
Every team sets out and you want to win the championship. Win the championship. That is a successful season. Anything else isn't successful.
It didn't really hit me after the game. It hit me the next year, seeing that this trophy is going to be forever. Your name's going to be a part of it, and you're going to be associated with the Grey Cup winning team.
Canadian football's eastern roots gave this rugged game at least a touch of refinement. Out west, settlers toughened by hardship and prairie winters reveled in their own bone-crushing version. Fought with a ferocity and abandon that turned a simple game into a no-quarter battle.
They just threw money into the pot, and the first one that drew blood got the money. There were a lot of broken bones and broken noses and front teeth missing and that kind of thing. In the first game, Regina played against Saskatoon. Up in Saskatoon, the police chief was so upset with the fact that the Regina team was winning, and he thought they were playing too rough against the Saskatoon boys, that he came on the field and had the Regina team arrested.
In spite of the potential for injury or arrest, football thrived on the Canadian prairie. The Hamilton Tigers became the first team to journey west, playing exhibition games in Winnipeg, Moose Jaw, Regina, and Calgary. While Eastern teams were happy to share the game with the West, sharing their championship trophy was another matter.
Only Eastern teams would play for the Grey Cup, and in 1911, the Calgary Tigers won the championship of the West, and they challenged. They wanted to play in the Grey Cup, and the CRU wouldn't let them. They would turn them down. They said, you didn't play in the East, you can't play challenge for the Grey Cup.
Finally, with great reluctance, the Edmonton Eskimos were allowed to come east in 1921 to challenge Toronto for the right to sip from the Earl's silvered mug. Their timing couldn't have been worse. They ran head-on to the man known as the Big Train, Lionel Conacher.
They ended up losing 23-0 in that game. Conacher, as a matter of fact, scored 15 points, and halfway through the third quarter had to leave because he had a hockey game that night.
Hockey and football were just two of the many sports on the Conacher resume, all played so brilliantly that he was named Canada's Athlete of the Half-Century. Since 1921, Western teams had marched east for the Grey Cup game, only to fall to the Eastern football powerhouses. In desperation, they cast their eyes not to the heavens, but to the south.
We didn't have the population in the West that they had in the East, so in order to get enough guys, it was we had to supplement them with good, experienced American players from American colleges. And of course, the first, most successful of those teams was the Winnipeg team in 1935.
Winnipeg coach Joe Ryan took a fishing trip to Minnesota and North Dakota that fateful summer of 1935. His bait, money, and he landed his limit. For $7,400, he came home with 9 imports, including the West's first superstar, the incomparable Fritzie Hansen. With Fritzie carrying the mail, the Bombers romped through the West and into the Grey Cup game, where on a muddy field in Hamilton, stunned Easterners got their first look at the little big man from Minnesota.
Too big, tough luck, wear them.
The post-war years were a boom time for Canadian football. In 1948, the Calgary Stampeders galloped through the 3-team West as they recorded the only undefeated season in league history. Heading east, the 4-day train trip became a traveling party as the Stampeders made the cross-country trek to the Grey Cup game. Arriving with Stetson-topped fans, Indian chiefs, chuck wagons, and horses, the Stampeders didn't just come from the West, they brought the West with them.
The 1948 Grey Cup game was pivotal in turning a celebration into a national festival. The Calgary Stampeders brought their chuck wagons, loaded them on the train. They had flapjack breakfasts. They had horses parading through hotel lobbies. It gave it another dimension. And from that time on, I think almost every Grey Cup game has been measured by what happened in 1948.
The Stampeders did more than defeat the Ottawa Rough Riders 12-7. Their victory and their fans' Western exuberance turned a 3-hour showdown into a week-long hoedown, and the party has never stopped. Grey Cup Day has become Grey Cup Week. A game once of regional interest is now a national obsession. And so, the story of the modern-day CFL begins. It is the story of a league often battered but never down, of a game that is an important thread in the Canadian cultural fabric, a game that is ours and ours alone.
Canadian football is something I was brought up on. I love the game because it's quick. It has always allowed the quarterback to be able to run with the ball, and I thoroughly enjoyed that challenge.
The excitement in the game, in a Canadian football game, with the 3 downs, with the wider field, with the kick return, it may be the best game in the world to watch on television.
It's so fast, it's so wide open, and I think it speaks to my personality. It's sort of a living on the edge type of football game.
It's exciting. You're never out of a ball game in the Canadian Football League. And as a quarterback, that's all you want is a chance. You want to have the ball in your hands with 1 minute to play and give your team a chance to win the ball game.
The Canadian Football League is arguably the most significant cultural institution in the country as it relates to bringing cities across the country together.
It's the one thing, the one professional sport that we have left that we can say is purely Canadian. It's the only one.
Canadian football is a magic show, a century-old spectacle, grown men battling to cross a line drawn in the dirt. It is a game filled with heroes, great players and great teams, bringing championship pride to their faithful fans. The field is a battleground where skill and determination are the tools of the trade. It is a game that has grabbed the nation by the heart. An annual struggle becomes an epic battle as teams fight for the ultimate glory, the chance to hold the Grey Cup and become forever known as a champion. At the turn of the century, Vancouver was quickly leaving its colonial roots behind, and the British game of rugby was being replaced by a new game, Canadian football. In the 30s, Vancouver's Big Four League was home to the Marilomas, the UBC Thunderbirds, the Vancouver Athletic Club, and the North Shore Lions. The professional game grew in popularity across the nation, and in 1954, Vancouver's football fans had something to cheer about.
I was playing touch football one Saturday afternoon with all my buddies, and we were talking about this team that hadn't been named yet, and we were saying, it wouldn't be great to be the water boy. So I played hooky from school and went down and applied for the water boy's job.
For young Bobby Ankles, a part-time job became a lifetime passion, and the BC Lions became the 9th franchise in the Canadian League. The man charged with building a winner was football icon Anis Stoukas.
Stuke was one of the great characters of the league, great salesman for football. But, you know, our teams were not very good because, of course, there wasn't a draft then. You had to start from scratch. But he did sign some good football players, Arnie Weinmeister, Laurie Nemes, some guys that had some pretty good ability, and, of course, found Norm Fieldgate, who was one of the all-time greats.
You know, Stuke, well, he was my mentor, so I really appreciate what he did for me. But, you know, we got beat bad on a lot of games. We used to get a lot of cheers on first downs. And that was a great accomplishment those first 2 years.
Along with the new football team, Vancouver got a new stadium. Fans didn't mind if their team suffered growing pains. The Lions were the top ticket in town.
Empire Stadium was new at that time for the British Empire Games, and it was a palace, you know, compared to most of the stadiums in the rest of Canada.
It was great, and the crowd was good, and of course with a cantilever roof on it that held the crowd, this noise came right out, shot right out on the field, so you knew if you did things wrong, you knew if you did things right. The Empire Stadium actually turned out to be a quagmire because it rained every day, almost every time we played it rained. And what it did for me was that all the fast guys were the same speed as I was because it was so hard to get around on the field that I didn't go up to their speed, they all come down to my speed.
While the Lions were a success at the box office, the team struggled. But in 1959, a whirlwind blew in from the University of Iowa, a dazzling running back named Willie Fleming.
I'd seen Canadian football played when I was a youngster at home in Detroit. And I knew that, you know, here, one thing you have was speed. And so I think it was suited for my talent. Vancouver was a real football town when I got here. People turned out to see us play ball, and that was good. I like that.
Fleming was an instant star. In his second year, he gained more than 1,000 yards. And to this day, his single-season rushing average of 9.7 yards stands as a professional football record.
I don't know if he ever did run full out. I mean, he didn't have to most of the time because his speed was such that nobody could catch him. He was the magic. I mean, people they went to the games to see Willie Fleming.
In 1961, a blockbuster trade with Calgary brought the Lions an arm to go with Fleming's legs. Quarterback Joe Kapp.
We needed a quarterback very badly, somebody who could be a leader. And of course, that's what Joe did perfectly. He was a great leader.
I think I got to the team in 1961 after the trade and immediately started the program of being with the players and getting to know them. And that was my job, to start the process. So we didn't win a lot of games, but we got better as a football team.
Joe was the leader. He was the leader of our ball club. Joe did most of the talking for us. He was outspoken, wasn't afraid of anything, he loved playing football, and I'll play with him anytime.
He would do anything to get the pass off down the field. I mean, more times he was being hung on by two defensive ends and a defensive tackle, and he would still get the ball down the field. Very competitive. I mean, he played more wounded than he did healthy.
In the early 60s, the Lions showed signs of improvement. With a solid base of Canadian players and some of the best American talent money could buy, things were looking up for Coach Dave Scrine.
At that time, we could compete with the salaries being paid in the U.S. I mean, we signed Tom Brown, who was the top choice in the United States.
Tom Brown was probably considered the best at his position coming out of college football that year. He was the first real big man that I saw that could do some of the things athletically that he could do.
Tom Brown was the leader of a marauding defense that earned their nickname, the Headhunters. And with the Joe and Willie show piling up the points, the Lions captured the West and took to the field in 1963 for their first Grey Cup appearance, facing the heavily favored Hamilton Tiger Cats.
Of course, it was our first time in the Grey Cup for BC Lions, and so you don't know what to expect, but it was quite a thrill. People were excited, they had seen a few Grey Cups in Vancouver, but not with the BC Lions in it.
With the hometown crowd behind them, Coach Scrine's Lions were holding their own. But in the second quarter, their Grey Cup dream turned to a nightmare when Ticat tough guy Angelo Mosca put the brakes on BC speedster Willie Fleming.
Willie had a habit of going wide and cutting back against the grain. And what happens is I dive right over the top of Willie, my knee catches the back of his head. Because Mosca hit Willie Fleming, it was a dirty hit. There was no penalty called on the play. And Willie got knocked out of the game.
I don't remember anything about it, to tell you the truth. I don't know until some of the players told me what had happened. But whether it was dirty or not, I don't know. I leave that to other people to do. All I know is I made him famous.
With a 21-10 victory, the Ticats proved they were the better team. But as Hamilton celebrated, the Lions looked ahead, determined that the Grey Cup would soon be theirs.
I think our players, to a man, rededicated themselves after that game in 1963, the loss to Hamilton. And we weren't done yet. We were not going to be denied.
In 1964, the Lions had their chance for revenge against Angelo Mosca and the Hamilton Tiger Cats.
We almost were certain we were going to win it. I mean, it was one of those things that there was a feeling among the team that we had come and done the route, paid our price. We were ready for it.
I was determined to show Angelo Mosca that, he couldn't keep me down or anything like that. I went right at him, and he had his chance to hit me, and face to face, and he couldn't touch me. I ran right past him, and he couldn't do nothing but grab dirt. So I got back at him that way.
The Lions were unstoppable. A botched field goal became a touchdown, and BC's running game tore through the Ticat defense. With a 34-24 victory, the Lions returned home heroes.
The city of Vancouver, on our return, just opened their arms to us. A marvelous thing and very special. There was love here for the BC Lions.
1967 brought Lions fans a new hero, a rugged Canadian receiver who'd spent 2 seasons with the NFL's Minnesota Vikings, Jim Young.
I got a nice big raise coming from the NFL to come to the CFL. The surprising thing was the caliber of play in the CFL in '67 was very close to what the caliber of play was in the NFL.
Jimmy could do everything. I mean, he had great speed, good hands, and he liked to hit people when they were looking the other way or when they were looking at him. I mean, he didn't really care, but he was a complete football player, really.
Jim Young's take-no-prisoners playing style earned him the nickname Dirty 30. But Young paid a price for his fearless approach to the game.
My second year with Minnesota, I got a shoulder separation that they didn't fix at the time, and that virtually I played one-handed the next 13 years of my career. So I did a lot of blocking with my left arm and my head. The worst thing came was the season that I dislocated my other shoulder, and they put a harness on it. So I had two shoulders that wouldn't work.
He wore a leather strap to his bicep, which was strapped around his chest, and 3 links of chain in between. And he used to knock the ball out of the air with one hand and catch it with both, and he played half a season like that.
In 1968, with 8 games remaining, every Lions quarterback was injured or limping. Former Edmonton great and now Lions assistant coach Jackie Parker was called into service as an emergency backup.
I didn't think I was going to have to play, but the first play we ran from the line of scrimmage, our quarterback got hurt. And so we didn't have anybody else there to even take the ball. So I went in and played the game.
He'd been out of football for 3 years. He was coaching. He wasn't in great condition, but you could see the magic was there as a quarterback.
Wayne Harris was playing middle linebacker, and he runs over and kind of knocks me down gently. He said, "What are you doing out here?" He said, "Are you nuts?" I said, "Yep, I'm nuts."
I never forget him after the game. He couldn't get into his car to go home. He was just so beat up.
In 1970, Empire Stadium was fitted with artificial turf. While it looked like an improvement, appearances can be deceiving.
What they did was they took out the sod, they paved it over, and then they put indoor-outdoor over pavement. At least that's what it looked like, and that's what it felt like.
Playing in Empire Stadium is like playing between parked cars. I'm snapping one day and I'm looking down at the turf, and there's paint. There's green paint on the field, and I scratch away at the green paint, and there's black asphalt. That's how they used to repair Empire Stadium. They used to spray the asphalt with green paint, and that's what we played on. It was a tough field.
The early 70s were turbulent times for the Lions, on and off the field. All-star Bill the Undertaker Baker was recruited to deliver law and order to Coach Eagle Key's squad.
He said, "You're no longer the Undertaker, you're the caretaker. This team has got a lot of problems." And boy, he ever right. It was just the wildest bunch of guys in the world. Sure as shoot about, it wasn't many days later, we're out in the practice field, and the police showed up and arrested 2 or 3 of the players for something.
By 1975, Bobby Ackles had risen through the ranks from water boy to general manager of the BC Lions. The following year, he signed a local college kid named Pasaglia, who would soon become a fan favorite known simply as Lou.
I thought those Lou's were actually booze at first, but it grew on you and the fans picked up on it, so I used that as a motivator every time I went out there to kick.
Luke Pasaglia is probably the best kicker I've ever seen as a pure kicker. He'd been a high school quarterback, and then he'd been a college quarterback and receiver, and he kept his head into the game at all times.
In 1977, Vic Rapp was given the Lions coaching reins. His instinct for great talent and an intense competitive spirit helped launch an exciting new era for the BC Lions.
I think what Vic did very well was recruit players. He had a great eye for players from 77, 78, 79 on. We had the best players in the league.
Under Vic Rapp, quarterback Jerry Taggy and the Lions' great receiving corps became famous for their heart-stopping last-minute victories, earning them the nickname Jerry and the Cardiacs.
We weren't that good, but Jerry Taggy would always find a way to get the ball to Jim Young in the dying minutes of most football games, and we would win.
Facing Winnipeg in the 77 semifinal, a spectacular knockdown by Joe Forqueen got the Lions to the Western Final in Edmonton. But the jubilation was short-lived. Playing on an ice floe called Clark Stadium, the Stone Cold Lions never had a chance.
Remember, we went 2 days early to practice, to get acclimatized. How you get acclimatized to -17, I don't know. But I remember the opening kickoff went into the end zone, and we returned it to the 1-yard line. It wasn't a good place to start.
I had icicles hanging down from my mustache. Couldn't take my helmet off because if I did, you wouldn't get it back on again. If you ever tried to kick a block of cement, that's what the football felt for me.
We just never got in the game. It was so cold that it took me about half hour after the game finished to get my shoes off.
The one-sided contest led to a 38-1 embarrassment for the Lions. While the team improved under Coach Rapp, they never captured the West, a failure that eventually cost him his job. In '83, he was replaced by Don Matthews, the architect of the Edmonton defense. That season, playing in their new Dome Stadium, the Lions came within a single point of capturing the Grey Cup. And 2 years later, they were back in the big game.
That '85 Grey Cup team was a remarkable team. We had, as everyone remembers, Swervin' Merv Fernandez, who was the MVP of the league that year. We had Roy DeWalt, who was just an outstanding person and an outstanding quarterback. And we swept into first place in the Western Division. And Merv Fernandez had hurt his leg. Merv did not play in the Western Final nor in the Grey Cup. And a young man named Ned Armour came out of nowhere and had 2 spectacular games.
But the Lions had more heroes on the field in Montreal's Olympic Stadium that day. As the Leos faced the Hamilton Tiger Cats, college quarterback turned kicker Louis Passaglia picked the perfect moment to use both legs.
All I could see was these 2 massive guys coming at me, and I don't know how I got away from it. I got to the outside, and the next thing you know, I'm running scared and looking for the first down marker, and the next play that Roy DeWalt threw a long touchdown pass to Ned Armour to break the game wide open.
The final score, 37-24. It was the Lions' turn to hoist Earl Grey's illustrious Silver Cup.
The ambition of all players is to win a championship. And I had waited so long, me and a number of other players, I just happened to be with that team longer than anybody else at the time, to actually carry that cup. I think I really understood what it took to actually walk off with that championship.
In 1986, Bobby Ackles left BC for the NFL. In 1988, newly acquired quarterback Matt Dunnigan took the team to within a single point of a Grey Cup championship. 2 years later, he too was gone. In 1990, the Lions' new owners were in need of leadership. They turned to a familiar face.
I couldn't resist the chance to be part of football and back in Vancouver, so we came back.
In 1990, Cap found the Lions and the CFL a superstar, a quarterback considered too small for the NFL, Doug Flutie.
I just was a great believer in his ability to, what he could do and would be perfect for the Canadian Football League, so we went after him.
I wanted to play football. I didn't want to sit around waiting for an opportunity. I wanted to be playing. And that was the #1 reason I went up to the CFL.
Doug Flutie was showing promise, and the following season, the Lions found themselves a brother act.
We needed to fill a spot at receiver, we really did. And when we had a chance to sign Darren, he deserved to be in the NFL. And then he comes to the BC Lions, and people are saying the only reason he's coming up is because he's my brother.
When I got to BC, that was one of the toughest times of my career, getting up there and having people think I was there because I was Doug's younger brother. But yet it motivated me also.
In 1992, Doug Flutie moved on to Calgary. 2 years later, the Western Final became Doug versus Darren as the Fluties met head-to-head. With the clock running down, BC quarterback Danny McManus and Darren Flutie dug deep and struck gold.
We had Darren Flutie doubled on 3rd down and 8, and guess who they throw the ball to? Darren Flutie, and we're being doubled, and he catches the ball.
If I'd have thrown that 9 out of 10 times, I don't know if he would have caught it. But this one time, he was able to go up in between 2 guys and bring the ball down.
With Calgary ahead by 5 points, the last play of the game was another McManus to Flutie miracle.
I didn't see who caught it, but I assumed it had to have been Darren.
with his knack for making the big play at the big time, I just had a feeling, and sure enough, I see Darren with the ball in his hands and gave him a big hug.
You know, I'm just kind of in a haze that we just accomplished this thing as a football team, and I'm off to my celebration, and of course he's off to think about what could have been.
But there was an even bigger challenge waiting back home. The 1994 Grey Cup game was not merely BC versus Baltimore. It was Canada versus the USA.
As a team, the BC Lions, it pumped us up more than anything because not only were we playing for the Canadian Football League, we were playing for Canada, period.
To see the fans all waving Canadian flags, to see guys like Vic Stevenson and Rob Smith tearing up while the national anthem's being played, it was just an atmosphere that can never be duplicated again.
The international showdown was a seesaw battle as both teams fought hard for the Canadian football crown. With the score tied, the last play of the game belonged to Louis Passaglia as BC lined up for a 38-yard field goal attempt.
I don't think I actually watched the kick. I turned around and went over there by the fans because I knew, watching the fans, they were going to tell me the reaction with the kick.
It didn't look all that well from where I was standing at the beginning, but the ball kind of faded back in and went right through the middle of the uprights. And at that point, it was just chaos.
It wasn't the prettiest kick I've ever made, but like they say, you don't care how it goes through as long as it goes through.
And Lou wasn't through. 6 years later, in the last game of his 25th and final season, the kid who grew up in the shadow of Empire Stadium kicked the field goal that won the 2000 Grey Cup.
It's one of the kicks that I'll never forget, but that game stands out as probably one of the most emotional games I've ever been through, but what a great ending.
Through pride and perseverance, the Lions have given British Columbia a rich tradition of football, and the promise to deliver more CFL excitement continues.
It's a fun game to play, and it's a fun game to coach, and it's a fun game to watch. It's a great game for the fans.
When the Lions came in, it was a big deal in our neighborhood because even though it was a melting pot of Vancouver, you had a lot of ethnic groups, and soccer was probably the main sport. It didn't take long for the parents of the kids that were involved in sport to pick up on what was coming into town. And I remember my first recollection of the BC Lions would probably be my dad in the late 50s. He was only in Vancouver for maybe 7 or 8 years. All of a sudden talking football with his fellow friends and so forth. And they were a big deal. And the fact that they're a professional football league and people were attending the games and all anybody ever talked about was, did you hear about the game at Empire Stadium last night? Did you hear the noise in the neighborhood? The Lions must have won, or somebody scored a touchdown last night, because from where we lived, we heard the noise from the stadium. It was, every time they scored, you could hear a big roar, so you kind of had to play-by-play by the noise that was going on in the stadium. If you heard a lot of noise that night, the Lions were doing well. If you didn't hear a lot of noise, you knew the other team was beating them. As I got older, a couple of our friends thought it would be neat to sneak into this game and watch the game by going in through the end zone in the quarterback club that had a little bit of a barbed wire at the top of the fence, but it was bent enough that if you jumped over at the right time, you wouldn't get your leg caught on it. So we snuck in that way. And then when I really wanted to legitimize the going to the game, I actually bought a ticket with the quarterback club, the Woodward's Quarterback Club, and I think I paid 50 cents. And we would go to the games and sit in that quarterback section in the north end of Empire Stadium, and with the intention of watching the game. But you know how kids are. We'd end up saying, hey, let's go play football, because behind the bleachers in the quarterback section there was grass by the concession stand. So we used a popcorn box as a football, and we used to play football games back there. And by the time we knew what was going on, the game would be over and we'd still be playing football there, not knowing who had won or lost. But those were my first experiences at Empire Stadium and watching the BC Lions. And I'll never forget that, because that was all part and parcel of wanting to be a part of the organization.
Some of my greatest memories of Canadian football was when I was a kid and a BC Lions fan. And as a young kid, we were in Prince George, 500 miles away from Vancouver. And I would bug my dad all year to take me to one game, because I'd listen to him on the radio. And then we'd drive down just to see the BC Lions play. And it was always pouring rain, and we'd get the kids. And I always got to sit over in the Nally chip seats in the back. And all you had to do was bring in a bag of chips to get your ticket. So it was packed full of kids. And we got a chance to see, the Jerry Taggies and Jim Young, and the year that they kept coming back in the last second, and got to actually go to some of those games and sit in the stands in the pouring rain and watch these guys with the clock running out come back, and Joe Fort Queen and Ray Nettles and some of the great BC Lions, and packed Empire Stadium. And then as a kid, when the final gun went, we'd all run onto the field, and I have Jim Young's chin strap from when I was 10 years old. Ran onto the field at Empire Stadium after game, and he gave me his chin strap. I still have it. He was it was one of my heroes when I was a kid, and it was a fun team to watch.
Empire Stadium was a thing of beauty. First of all, we had the Lions over to the mountainside. The smell of the hot dogs coming from the P&E, and when the P&E was on, it was a very special place. And outdoors, you play football outdoors. I don't care if it's raining.
The open air atmosphere in the stands, it was what I was used to. It was football. I mean, that's what we all thought football was all about, right? I got to play in a time where we evolved into the BC place, but in the beginning, that was football was all about, was the weather and the elements. You played in hot weather in the summer, and you played in the snow in the winter, and that was football. Empire Stadium resembled that. We never had snow there, but boy, we had some downpours, which made the ball slippery, and those are the elements that you fought against all the time. And people used to go back and say, if we could get rid of those elements, we could have a pure game. Football's not pure. Never was. It was a tough game played by tough people under extreme conditions. And maybe that's the lure of Empire Stadium.
Empire Stadium was a holy place, very holy place, especially for BC Lions.
Emery Barnes, I'm glad to tell you about Emery Barnes, because for me, Emery basically explains the type of player that we were looking for when we recruited American players. He was versatile, he had talent, he had skills, and yet he did not have a position that was the top position to play. However, at that time, you could, if you waited 3 years, you could become a Canadian citizen, and then you could play as a Canadian. And as a Canadian, he would have been very valuable. I convinced him to take out his Canadian citizenship, which I thought was very good. The only thing that wasn't as good is that in the meantime, I had gone into politics. I had been elected in the riding in Vancouver Centre and had served 2 terms there. And on the 3rd term, who runs against me but Emery Barnes and wins? So I had basically been the cause of my own defeat. I never forgave Emery, really, but fortunately he turned out to be a great politician, much better than I ever was.
The number one job of center is get the ball to the quarterback. Eagle Keys would tell me it's 100%, not 99.9, 100%. That ball has to get to the quarterback.
After that, you have a blocking assignment, and that's what you have to execute, just like the guards and tackles beside you. But an offensive center also calls a lot of the blocking. Like the quarterback will call the play, we'll go up, and according to the defense, the center's got the responsibility of calling what that defense is and then call the blocking assignments for the interior linemen. So all this goes on in a split second, and if a defense shifting, then you have to shift the blocking scheme too at the same time. It gets more complicated, and people say, well, that's not that tough if you were to read it off a script. But think about it when you're dog tired and 60,000 people screaming and you have to do it in split seconds. That's what makes the job difficult.
The worst weather I ever played in was the 1977 Western Final against the Edmonton Eskimos. If it wasn't minus 40, it felt like minus 40. Probably was minus 40. And we're playing the Western Final. We had just finished beating Winnipeg in the pouring rain at Empire Stadium the week before, not knowing what to look forward to in beautiful Edmonton. But we knew it was going to get cold, but it was really cold. Cold enough to where I had icicles hanging down from my mustache. Couldn't take my helmet off because if I did, you wouldn't get it back on again. And I found out later in my career I had a tough day kicking that day because it was a frozen football. Then I was watching my counterparts on the other team, Dave Cutler, booming footballs, and I think it was Gary Lefebvre punting the ball, and the ball was going a long distance for them, but for me that ball wasn't going anywhere. And I found out later that the ball I was using was away from the heaters and was frozen when they brought it on the field. And Dave Cutler had told his ball boy to keep their footballs near the heater. So whenever their offense and the kicking game was on the field, they had the nice, soft, heated balls. When our offense and our kicking game was on the field, we had the hard, frozen balls. I tell you what, if you ever tried to kick a block of cement, that's what the football felt for me. And to this very day, it's kind of intriguing that Dave pulled a fast one on us. So we've all heard of the Staples affair with the Montreal Alouettes. Well, the frozen football affair in the Western Final of 1977 cost us the game and our chance to go to the Grey Cup that year.
.30-30. Jimmy Young was, he's a guy I want to protect my back in an alley. He's a guy that will go battle with you anywhere you want to. Doesn't matter. You want to fight on the field, you want to play on the field, you want to go in the parking lot, you want to go in a bar. It doesn't matter where it is. 30-30, he'd make the tough catches. He'd come over the middle. He'd look for people to hit.
Football is a game where you hit and get hit as hard as people can do it to each other. Now, as much as you like to get in shape and work out, when people hit each other as hard as they can, it leaves bruises and leaves a lot of pain.
And I remember one time back in Empire Stadium when it was, he caught a pass along the sideline, cut back in, and when he cut back in, I was pursuing from an angle, and I caught him right in the side of the rib. I think I broke a couple of his ribs and things like that. He just looks up at me. He's grunting and groaning a little bit, smiles, gets back in the huddle. He keeps playing, but then I read about how he was injured afterwards in the paper the next day. But he looked at you and smiled. He is not ever, would not ever let you think that you got the best of him.
They kept 2 broken ribs I owe him.
Roy DeWalt was probably the most underrated football player that was in the Canadian Football League when I was with the BC Lions. Roy DeWalt was my first choice when I was named the head football coach of the BC Lions. He was a backup to Joe Powpow, and at the press conference accepting my head coaching position, I named Roy DeWalt as the starting quarterback that day. He has never let me down.
People never gave him the credit for what he was. I mean, he ran our offense. I mean, he'd do things. He'd come in and ask the offensive line for more time because he was going to send Mervyn on a hitch and go, and he just needed more time. And he would talk to you that way in the offensive line. It wasn't just the play. It wasn't an 87 strong right, Mervyn go. It was, he'd say, now I need more time for this. We need more time. We just can't have the normal protection. He was a good quarterback that way, very good.
You know, normally I don't have nightmares about a quarterback because basically it's the receiver and the quarterback who I play against. See, most people think, oh, you got to line up against this guy, Merv Fernandez. Very scary. But Roy DeWalt, who was throwing him with the ball, was just as scary, you know, because he could throw a deep ball from a standstill, you know, with no problem at all. And then you got a guy who, like Merv Fernandez, who runs a 4.4 40, and he's about 6'6". I'm 5'10". You know, it was very difficult. You know, that combination right there scared the crap out of me whenever we had to go play BC.
Roy DeWalt and I used to have a special signal. We looked at some defenses, and we noticed that the defensive tackle would cheat in the outside shade, and the middle linebacker would be off. And we knew we could always get a first down if it was 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2, and it'd be a one-on-one block between me and the middle linebacker because he'd be playing off. We always felt we could get that. So he'd reach between my legs, and he'd pinch the inside of my thigh, and my goodness did that hurt the way he wanted to go. And the team may be running a flash right toss sweep, but we'd snap the ball and be Roy and I. We never got stopped once. The rest of the team would be executing whatever and be Roy and I. And those are the subtle little things that Roy DeWalt would do and work with his players. So credit due. Roy DeWalt was a very good quarterback.
Moving into BC Place, I thought at the time was a great move, and we needed something different. We had 50 to 60,000 fans, quite a bit in the first 2 or 3 years, and the atmosphere in a stadium like that when it's full was unbelievable. I remember the guys being jacked and a lot of guys saying, you know what, when we walked onto that field and during the course of the game, especially in 83, 84, 85, you felt like you were an inch off the ground because of the noise that was generated by the fans and the whistling and so forth.
Really, the toughest place I found to play in was BC Place. When they had 60,000 people, I can remember it trying to kick out of the end zone when it was just so loud. I can remember going up to our up backs, which were 3 yards in front of me, and yelling at them, you know, to tell the center because they could not hear me. And I was right behind them yelling at them, and they couldn't hear me at all. I mean, it was the only way you could any communication was just through hand signals. And that was nerve-wracking, I admit it. You know, I mean, you'd think, and I'd played at that point 3 or 4 years, but when you went in there and the fans, it was the pressure you felt under, especially when you're backed up into your own end zone and the fans were going nuts. I never had very good games in BC Place.
If a fan was on the sidelines, I think he would really understand how violent it is out there. If you get down that sideline and see the speed that people come at each other and then hit and how much it really sounds, it's artificial when you're in a stadium and you're away from it. Occasionally you'll hear a hit and the crowd will go, ooh, right? And they know that someone's... But that goes on every play. You go down and listen to the line play. It is brutal. It is absolutely brutal down there. And TV cannot really enact. Once in a while you see it on the replay, a great hit. But there's hits going on in the offensive and defensive line like that all day, all night long. And I think they have an appreciation for what the game's all about if they were go down there and hear it and see it. But understand it anymore? It's more confusing if you're down on the sidelines. You get a one-dimensional view of what's going on. I think that's the other point, that the fan gets to watch from a bird's-eye view, and they're saying, well, this person's over there and over there. Why didn't he throw this? Well, if you go down the field and you see 2 6'4", 300-pounders coming in your face, and the quarterback dumps it out to the sideline, doesn't see a guy 20 yards downfield open, you would know why. He couldn't see him. It was impossible for him to see him. And that's the perspective of the game that you might not realize from sitting in the stands.
Playing football together professionally as brothers, I think, was more important to Doug than it was to me. Though that changed later, just recently, I think it's become more important to me. I wanted to, now that I had done everything I wanted to do in the Canadian Football League, I wanted to get back and play with him. But for most of our career, he really wanted to play together. We had just a brief time together in that 91 season, but very, very special moments.
Some of my most enjoyable games were played with Darren. And I still remember my college days, we had the game against Holy Cross where he caught his first touchdown pass. And he probably should have been named MVP of that game, but there were 5 votes at the end of the game. They give an award for the MVP of that game. 2 said Darren Flutie, 2 said Doug Flutie, and 1 said D. Flutie. So they gave it to me because I was a senior.
Oh, you're Doug's brother. When I came to the Lions, that was magnified the most it's ever been magnified. I mean, I went to Boston College. I followed Doug there, and it wasn't so bad. I was a high school star in Massachusetts, so I went to Boston College, and that was fairly normal. But when I got to BC, I mean, it was another country. No one knew what I had done through high school, through college, and even my brief NFL career. So, boy, that was one of the toughest times of my career, getting up there and having people think I was there because I was Doug's younger brother. But yet it motivated me also. So it was a tool to motivate me to play better football.
Number one, I love my brother. I think the world of him, and I wish we had had the opportunity to play together more. I live and die with every ball that is thrown to him and watching the game, even if I'm on the opposing team. Seeing him go up over the middle for a ball and getting the tar kicked out of him, or getting frustrated when I'm sitting in the stands watching him play and the quarterback throws the ball the other way and Darren was wide open on the backside. And I know as a quarterback you're not always going to, you're taking your read and you start at a certain point and all that. But boy, the games, we played 8 games together. He had, I think it was somewhere around 875 yards in the games that we played together. And he had the one day against Calgary where I think he had 12 catches, 275 yards, 3 touchdowns, where we were just having fun.
As a football player, he is the best football player I ever played with as a teammate. He is the most competitive, most talented player I've ever played with as a football player. So I would separate the person as my brother, which is hard to do, and separate the football player. And you can say no more except that, I love him. He's my brother, but he's also the greatest quarterback that ever played in the Canadian Football League.
How did the BC Lions feel going into the '94 Grey Cup against Baltimore, who had all Americans and who had come into the league and made it to the Grey Cup for the first time in their first year? I'm going to tell you what, as a team, the BC Lions, it pumped us up more than anything, because not only were we playing for the Canadian Football League, we were playing for Canada, period. All of Canada was behind us because it was like Canada against the U.S. right then. Why? It was unfair to a lot of people in their minds that Baltimore could use all Americans. But in Canada, we couldn't. We had to have, the mixture of Canadians and Americans. Well, the Canadian guys on that team took that, really hard and upset. I mean, they took it with a lot of pride. I think for us to win the '94 Grey Cup was all due to our Canadians. They stepped up like you would not believe, with a ton of pride. We had nothing but Canadians on our offensive line and nothing but Canadians on our defensive line, basically. And they destroyed Baltimore in the second half, just ran right through them. And I think basically, offensively, our offensive line ran the ball down their throat. We just took it to them. And I think what was good about that is that it was the Canadians basically taking it upon themselves to say, look, we're just as good as the Americans, and we can play this game. This is our game.
I'm on baby alert probably from the first playoff game, which in '94 was Edmonton. But then it gets a little closer to your due date as we played in Calgary, and I can remember having a conversation with Eric Tillman, our general manager, about right after the Calgary game, we all feel great. Eric wanted me to fly home and be with my wife for at least part of that week, and then maybe the baby would be delivered and I'd come back later in the week and play in the Grey Cup. But decided against that, decided to be just on alert. And if my wife, this was our first child in '94, was the type of person that I really had to be there for her, especially with our first child. We're not these veteran parents. We were both very nervous about this delivery, and being away from each other wasn't a good thing. So I really wanted to be there for my wife, and of course to see the birth of my first child. So I was just on alert that whole week, Grey Cup week, and it became a topic, I guess, at times. But in my mind, at that time, there was just no question. My priority was family, as it had been my whole life, just instilled in me by my parents. And I wanted to be there for my wife and for my first child. So if the call had come, of course, I would have been on the first flight and home and being with my wife. But that call never came. But boom, we finished the game. We won the Grey Cup, celebrated that night, flew home first thing the next morning to be with my wife. And as soon as I got there, literally, she's into labor. And the baby's, born to whatever it was, 20 hours later. So, I credit my wife with, as they say, keeping the baby in the oven for a little longer, letting it cook. So.
I had retired in Las Vegas and figured that I wouldn't ever be back in football again. I was enrolled as a freshman at UNLV. I've done a lot of things sort of ass backwards in my life. So here I am at 62 years old as a freshman at UNLV in the fine arts course, and enjoying painting and photography and drawing and even writing. And I got a phone call one Thursday afternoon from David Braley, who owns the BC Lions Football Club, and he asked me if I would have an interest in coming back to Vancouver and running the BC Lions. And I said to David, well, let me think about it over the weekend, and I'll give you a call on Monday. Well, I called him Friday morning, and I said, let me have a bit of information. Tell me about this and that. So we talked for a while. I called him on Monday and said, yes, I'd have an interest, whenever we can get together. But the thing is, I had to withdraw from college. And that was difficult to do, although I did withdraw rather than just drop out because I didn't want those F's on my report card.
You know, 25 years, you knew it was time to go because physically you couldn't do it anymore. The aches and pains started hitting you when you got up in the morning. You were icing down and in the hot tub after practice, where before you used to just walk home on a regular basis. Those field goals that were routine from 50 yards, 55 yards, all of a sudden you're asking your team to move the ball 5 yards closer. Let's keep the field goals inside 47, 46 yards. So little things like that you knew that in the long run, even though you're consistent, you're still hurting the team in some aspect, where it was time to move on. The younger kicker can get you those long field goals. Hopefully you'll find one that's consistent, that sort of thing. And basically, physically, you knew that your leg was wearing out. There wasn't much left. Walking into that last Grey Cup game, it was a tough week. Probably the toughest week that I ever experienced as a pro, with all that was riding on the game and what was going on through your head with all the memories of those 25 years. It was hard to focus for the first time in my life on those 60 minutes of football, because it didn't matter where I was during that course of the game. I started getting involved with what was happening around the game and what was on the field in a lot of cases. Looking up in the stands for the last time, seeing those Louis cutouts in the stands, watching the fans enjoy the game that you loved as a kid. And at times I got lost in the atmosphere of the game. But to be in a position to make up for a mediocre day, to kick a game-winning field goal with about a minute to go, not knowing at the time that would be the difference, made that last kick really special. It's one of the kicks that I'll never forget. But that game stands out as probably one of the most emotional games I've ever been through. But what a great ending.
The ultimate goal in Canadian football is the Grey Cup. Since 1954, the BC Lions have experienced the euphoria of capturing the national championship 4 times. After taking a savage beating in their Grey Cup debut from the Hamilton Tiger Cats in 1963, the BC Lions roared back for revenge in 1964. On Saturday, November 28th, amidst the rainy conditions, the BC Lions were ready to feast on their eastern cousins at Toronto's CNE Stadium. Joe Kemp, a quarterback with the heart of a lion, led the offense, and Tom Brown anchored a defensive unit known as the Headhunters. The hero of the day was defensive star Bill Munsey, who took over at the fullback position for the injured Bob Swift, who scored the first touchdown of the game. Munsey would score a touchdown on offense and a second one on defense. Jim Carpet and Willie Fleming recorded the other two major scores as the Lions captured their first Grey Cup championship in franchise history with a 34-24 victory. After a heartbreaking loss in the 1983 Grey Cup to the Toronto Argonauts, the BC Lions clawed their way back to the Grey Cup in 1985 to meet the Hamilton Tiger Cats at Montreal's Olympic Stadium. A Ned Armour touchdown and 2 field goals from Louis Passaglia gave BC a 13-0 lead, but Hamilton struck back with 2 touchdowns. Down by a score of 14-13 and forced into a punting situation, it took a clutch play from Louis Passaglia to change the complexion of the game. The Passaglia run ignited the BC offense as quarterback Roy DeWalt went long distance to wide receiver Ned Armour. Despite the absence of injured wide receiver and Shenley MVP Mervyn Fernandez, DeWalt was able to secure air superiority thanks to the reliable hands of Armour and Jim Sandusky. The final result was a 37-24 triumph that brought an end to a 21-year drought and the opportunity for team captain Al Wilson to hoist the Grey Cup. National pride was on the line in the 1994 Grey Cup as the BC Lions faced the Baltimore Stallions before a patriotic crowd at BC Place to witness a battle for the preservation of the Canadian game. The Lions were a team of destiny, and the road to the Grey Cup featured dramatic victories, and with the clock winding down, they produced a Hollywood ending. On the last play of the game, under intense pressure, Louis Passaglia provided the heroics with a 38-yard field goal that gave the Lions a 26-23 victory to keep the Grey Cup on Canadian soil. A week before the National Classic, the BC Lions marched into the host city and mauled the Calgary Stampeders in the Western Final that set up a showdown with the Eastern champion Montreal Alouettes. Veteran quarterback Damon Allen displayed his mastery of the game by utilizing a lethal ground attack from 2 of the best running backs in the game, Robert Drummond and the Diesel, Sean Millington. The winning points came from the boot of veteran kicker Louis Passaglia, as the BC Lions became the first team without a .500 record to win the Grey Cup by edging the Alouettes 28-26. When the Grey Cup was presented, all eyes were on Louis Passaglia, who after 25 years with the Lions would retire a champion. 4 Grey Cup championships and counting, the BC Lions continue to roar in their quest for Grey Cup glory as future generations strive to become Grey Cup champions. Canadian football is a magic show. It is a game that has grabbed our nation by the heart. This is the story of CFL Traditions, a 5-hour television special that showcases the history and heroes of Canadian football. Live the game's greatest moments through the eyes and hearts of its most celebrated legends. Now available on DVD and VHS, CFL Traditions is the ultimate collector's edition. Each of the 9 franchises is featured in their own special team edition release. 9 teams, 9 titles, available in stores everywhere.
Canadian football is something I was brought up on. I love the game because it's quick. It has always allowed the quarterback to be able to run with the ball, and I thoroughly enjoyed that challenge.
In the Canadian League, there's no such thing as being a rookie. You're a contributor or you're not, or else you don't make it.
The excitement in the game, in a Canadian football game, with the 3 downs, with the wider field, with the kick return, it may be the best game in the world to watch on television.
It's so fast, it's so wide open, and I think it speaks to my personality. It's sort of a living on the edge type of football game.
It's exciting. You're never out of a ball game in the Canadian Football League. And as a quarterback, that's all you want is a chance. You want to have the ball in your hands with 1 minute to play and give your team a chance to win the ball game.
It was an opportunity that I was being given that I didn't see happening in my own country. And I really weighed the pros and cons of going to Canada or staying in the United States, and I chose to go to Canada because they were giving me a realistic opportunity to play the game that I loved.
I came up just with the attitude that I was going to learn about the CFL, put my best foot forward. Whatever it took, I was going to get the job done, and anything else was not acceptable.
I wanted to come play. And in the NFL, they would have just used me for, okay, for this and for that. And in Edmonton, I knew I had a chance to do what I wanted to do and play the game.
It did put the fun back in football for me. It enabled me to go back out, just be an athlete, play football, and enjoy it. And I'll be forever grateful for that.
The Canadian Football League is arguably the most significant cultural institution in the country as it relates to bringing cities across the country together.
It's the one thing, the one professional sport that we have left that we can say is purely Canadian. It's the only one.